what's your thoughts on passive income, Alex? And is it something we should be aspiring for?
So, first, I think it'd be helpful for everyone to even define terms of how to think about passive income versus active income. So, one is that people often discuss it in binary terms, passive versus active, when it's really more of a continuum of how passive is it versus how active is it. And that way, it becomes way less black and white. When I think about passive versus active, when people are starting out, I generally just discard it entirely because they typically don't have sufficient capital in order to actually make meaningful passive income, and they would get significantly higher returns on increasing their active income. And virtually every extremely rich person who's self-made, as my asterisk, generally has gigantic active income and only begins to look at passive when they have so much money from reinvesting in their higher return things, which is what got them this very large active income, that they're like, where else should I put it? And then at that point, it's really a question of diversification, which is like, how much more do I not want to double down on the main thing? And that's a completely personal question. And there is no, in my opinion, there's no right answer to that. Because that's a fundamental, like, how much risk do I want to take, which I see is entirely personal. But I'll give you a real example of like an investment I made 5 years ago, which was we did exited the business, and I had more time on my hands, and I was like, okay, well, why don't I just start spending, a couple $1,000,000 a year on making content? Now that had basically zero return in that time period, but if I were to look at the return on capital for that, $2 million a year I did for the first few years compared to today, it was probably the highest return capital that I made. But was that a passive? No, it's definitely not passive. It was 100% active from an investing perspective. And so this is when people are like, what do you mean by investing yourself? I mean that, right? Like you're investing in either the skills that you're acquiring, the businesses that you have, and a very simple investment a lot of times can get you ideally leverage on your time. And so I would rather think for the person who's starting out, not like, how do I make this passive? I'd rather say, how do I get more leverage on my active? And so like I could start by shoveling snow in the beginning. And then once I save up enough of my shekels, then I'll buy a snow blower. And all of a sudden I can go from doing, one driveway an hour to doing 3 driveways an hour. And then boom, I tripled my income. Now for that 1 week that my cash flow is down because I had to buy the equipment, I'll have made less money, but then I'll very quickly recoup it. Now to the same degree, that's in a capital expense from an equipment perspective, but you can do the same thing from a skills perspective of,